That day, Chris, my boyfriend of over 2 years, took me to a karaoke bar to meet his high school classmates. Halfway through, I excused myself to the restroom. On my way back, I accidentally overheard his friend asking him something. "Chris, your girlfriend is really beautiful. When did you two start dating?" "But she looks a bit like Chloe, doesn't she?" I froze outside the door. Even through the closed door and the loud music inside, I heard Chris's reply clearly. He said, "I only pursued her because she looks like Chloe." In an instant, my eyes welled up with tears. Chris and I met during our junior year of college. I remember it was an elective course. I was sitting at the edge of the row with a glass on the corner of my desk. Chris accidentally knocked it over as he walked past. The sound of glass shattering on the floor echoed through the room. I was wearing a skirt and instinctively pulled my feet back. Chris was startled too and immediately asked if I was okay, apologizing profusely. I had actually seen him before. He was handsome and quite famous in our major. My roommates often showed me his photos. I smiled and waved it off, watching him get a broom to clean up the mess. Just as I thought he was leaving, he took out his phone. "Let's exchange contacts," he said. "I'll pay you back for the glass." I hesitated, noticing everyone watching us, but eventually added him. He paid me back, and I thought that would be the end of it. Surprisingly, Chris started messaging me frequently. He was a perfect conversationalist, keeping a steady but respectful distance. We would save seats for each other in the library and grab dinner after study sessions. He prepared ginger tea for me during my period and sent me long lists of health tips. He brought me an umbrella when it rained and stayed by my side when I was down. Gradually, I began to open up to him. We became a couple within 3 months of knowing each other. That day, he held me and said he was the happiest man in the world. And I truly believed I had found my own happiness. Recalling everything now after hearing Chris's words, it all feels incredibly ironic. So all his kindness, his attentiveness, and his tenderness were only because I looked like someone named Chloe. I suddenly remembered once when Chris was drunk and muttered that name. I didn't hear it clearly back then, and when I asked, he went silent. My heart felt like it was being squeezed, and I fled the hallway in embarrassment, retreating to the restroom. I didn't leave immediately. Instead, I washed my face and gathered my emotions before returning to the room. When Chris and his classmates saw me, they stopped talking about that topic and started asking about us. Chris just smiled or offered occasional comments throughout. To hide my true feelings, I did something rare and chatted with the strangers for a long time. Before leaving, Chris went to the restroom himself. One of his classmates whispered to me, "You should keep a close eye on Chris. Guys this handsome are easily stolen." He said it half jokingly, as a friendly warning. I played along, responding with a joke, but added one thing. "I trust him. He's not the type to change his mind so easily." I noticed a fleeting look of pity and surprise in his classmates' eyes. I waved goodbye and went outside to wait for Chris. Chris and I moved in together after graduation, though we slept in separate rooms. Chris said he was afraid he wouldn't be able to control himself. He claimed he would feel guilty for life if we didn't end up together for some reason. I was moved at the time, but now I realize he probably just didn't want to sleep with me. I continued acting as I always had, cooking for him, acting cute, and saying I loved him. It was as if I had never heard that conversation with his high school friends. I didn't bring it up or confront him, I just continued being good to him. However, I noticed he was becoming increasingly cold toward me lately. Before, he would take care of me during my period and comfort me. Now, he just perfunctorily told me to drink warm water before retreating to his room. Even though we lived in the same house, we barely saw each other. He only came out of his room for meals. Passing his door late at night to use the bathroom, I could hear him talking. But through the wall, I couldn't make out the words. Later, while we were having dinner, I walked past him to get more rice and saw his phone light up. It was just a glance, but I caught the message clearly. "Chloe, I'm returning home next month." I walked past as if nothing happened. When I returned, his phone was flipped over, screen down. I pretended not to notice. As I sat down, he put down his utensils and headed back to his room. Before entering, he told me, "Don't come into my room if it's not necessary." I didn't ask why, I just smiled and said, "Okay." Saturday was a beautiful day, so I dragged him out shopping. He didn't want to go at first, but eventually agreed after I insisted. He probably didn't want me to suspect anything. But even outside, his eyes were glued to his phone the whole time. I made an excuse to use the restroom and asked him to wait, but I actually went to pick up a surprise I'd prepared, a gaming laptop. He stared at me in shock as I held the bag. I tucked it into his hands and smiled. "I felt like you've been in a bad mood lately, and your old laptop needed replacing anyway, so I bought this for you." He pulled me into a hug and whispered in my ear, "Soph, it's so good to have you." Leaning against him, the smile faded from my eyes, replaced by numbness and a hint of disgust. Maybe because of that laptop, Chris's attitude improved significantly. At least he wasn't as cold as before. He would sit with me in the living room while I watched TV, though he was always on his phone, chatting with someone. One night, emerging from the shower, he checked his phone and said he was going out with his college roommates the next day. I smiled and said okay, then transferred $1,000 to him. "Remember to drink less," I told him. "If you really can't help but overdo it, call me." He looked dazed for a moment, then walked over and kissed my forehead, ruffling my hair. "Got it, thanks, babe. I'll take you out for a feast once I find a job." I gave a small smile in response. Once he went into his room, the smile vanished instantly. I took a tissue and wiped the spot where he had kissed me. I had started to dislike his touch. It made me uncomfortable. Chris and I had both recently graduated and hadn't found jobs yet. My family had used their connections to arrange a position for me, but I refused, wanting to rely on my own resume. Since I was applying to large corporations, some applications went ignored, while others ended in rejection due to my lack of experience. As for Chris, he always brushed me off whenever I brought up the subject. However, I had a steady income from writing. On good months, I could make over $10,000. Even on slow months, I earned a stable $5,000. I had saved quite a bit since college. Chris, on the other hand, still lived on an allowance from his parents. His family was well off. They gave him $4,000 a month in college and increased it to $5,000 after graduation. His roommates said his parents would keep supporting him until he got married and had his own family. I found it unbelievable that a grown man still relied on his parents for living expenses after graduation. But Chris spent money recklessly and never saved anything. Sometimes he even had to rely on me. The next day, he indeed drank quite a bit. His roommate, Will, sent me their location and asked me to pick him up. When he handed Chris over, Will looked hesitant. Finally, looking at Chris, who was passed out on my shoulder, he spoke. "Sophie, as Chris's girlfriend, I think you should know this." I struggled to support Chris's weight. "Go on." Will looked uncomfortable. When Chris first got drunk, he kept muttering a name, Chloe. "I know her too, Chris mentioned her before. She's a high school classmate, his the one that got away, I guess." Afraid I'd misunderstand, Will added quickly, "But Chris said he'd forgotten her after he started dating you. I don't know what's wrong with him this time." His voice trailed off as he spoke. Seeing I was about to drop Chris, he continued. "If he says that name again later, don't blame him. After all, that was high school stuff. You two have been together for over 2 years and were always so happy. Don't let this cause a fight. It's not worth it." My heart felt bitter, but I didn't show it. I kept smiling at Will, though my eyes were cold. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm not that unreasonable." Relieved by my answer, Will helped me get Chris into the car, offered a few more reminders, and left. I finally managed to drag Chris home and get him onto the bed. As I was washing his face, he grabbed my hand and whispered, "Chloe, I miss you so much." I looked at him coldly, then expressionlessly shook off his hand and went to the kitchen to make him some honey water. Returning with the glass, I could still hear him calling her name. One sentence was particularly clear. "I didn't mean to start a new relationship," Chris said. "It's just that Sophie looks so much like you." I walked over, woke him up without emotion, then put on a worried expression as I helped him drink the honey water. He opened his eyes groggily and looked at me. The disappointment in his gaze was unmistakable. I squeezed his hand and gently stroked his forehead. "Go to sleep," I whispered. "I'll stay right here with you." I really did stay in Chris's room all night. Holding his hand, I sat on a chair and leaned against the bed. I listened to him mutter Chloe's name periodically until I drifted off to sleep. Chris woke me up the next morning. He apologized with a face full of guilt and even massaged my shoulders. I told him it was fine, and after freshening up, I went to the kitchen to cook for him. Surprisingly, he actually came to help me in the kitchen, which was rare. During breakfast, he held my hand and promised he'd drink less in the future. I smiled back. "It's okay, you were just with your friends. Just remember to send me your location before you get too drunk next time so I can pick you up." Chris looked at me with a complicated expression. After a long pause, he finally whispered, "Okay." Since the big corporations weren't working out, I sent a resume to a startup. The next day, HR called me for an interview. Coincidentally, I knew the person interviewing me. It was the campus idol from our university, Julian, who was 1 year ahead of me. He was very famous at school. I heard he started his own business in his sophomore year and opened his own company after graduation. I never expected to end up at his firm. The person next to him introduced him as their CEO, Mr. Julian. I pretended not to know him, nodded, and greeted him politely. Julian seemed to be in a good mood, smiling since the moment I walked in. But his first sentence left me stunned. "How about becoming my assistant for $6,000 a month, Sophie?" I was taken aback, wanting to ask how he knew my name, but then I saw my resume under his hand and swallowed the question. I dazedly agreed to his offer. However, I was confused why Julian would hire a fresh graduate with no experience as his assistant. That evening at dinner, I told Chris about the job. He was surprised I found work so quickly. I just smiled and didn't answer directly, instead telling him, "I'll text you if I have to work late. I'll prepare the next day's meals every night so you just have to heat them up. Don't order too much takeout, it's bad for your health." He froze, then nodded. After a moment, he handed me his phone. "Pick one, it's a gift for starting your new job." I took the phone. It was showing various bracelets, priced at $200 or $300. They weren't expensive, but for Chris, who had no income, they weren't cheap either. As we were looking together, the phone suddenly vibrated. A WeChat notification popped up at the top of the screen. "Chloe, my schedule changed. I'm arriving at the airport on the 28th at 3:30 p.m. Are you coming?" Chris hurriedly snatched the phone back, looking panicked. I smiled and asked calmly, "A friend?" Chris's gaze shifted unsteadily. "Just a high school desk mate," he said perfunctorily, then added as if afraid I'd misunderstand, "We were on good terms. She's coming back from studying abroad." "Are you going to pick her up?" I asked simply. I was just asking casually, but he seemed to misinterpret it. "I don't have to go if you don't want me to," he said quickly. I shook my head. "I just think you shouldn't go empty-handed if you're picking someone up. How about this? I'll help you pick out a gift for her as a welcome home present." The moment the words left my mouth, Chris lunged forward and hugged me tight. "Soph, why are you so understanding?" he whispered. "I love you so much." I smiled, but coldness flickered in my eyes. It was utterly pathetic. Since I was new to the job, I was very busy. I often worked late with Julian until past 11. Sometimes he would drive me home, and sometimes Chris would pick me up. I calculated the time and took a short break on the 26th to buy a gift for Chloe at the mall. Julian went with me. He thought I was buying something for myself and even offered to pay as an onboarding gift. I refused and told him I was picking something for my boyfriend's high school classmate. Julian looked at me with a complicated gaze before muttering, "You're quite the dutiful girlfriend, picking out gifts for other women for your boyfriend." I smiled and shook my head while paying. "You wouldn't understand," I said. I finished the purchase and left with Julian. In the car, he asked, "Do you love your boyfriend very much?" I raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. I had been coming home very late these past 2 days, and leaving early in the morning. I hadn't even seen Chris for 48 hours. On the evening of the 28th, while working late, I suddenly remembered I hadn't given the gift for Chloe to Chris yet. I called him, but he didn't pick up. Feeling anxious, I called Will instead. Will was very honest and sent me their location. He told me Chris had organized a party to welcome Chloe back, and both their college and high school friends were there. I thanked him, grabbed the watch I'd bought, told Julian, and left. He originally wanted to drive me, but I refused. Before I left, he just said, "Be good to yourself." Will sent me the room number directly. When I pushed the door open, everyone in the room turned to look at me. Some were Chris's college friends, but most were strangers, probably his high school classmates. I spotted Chris immediately and let my gaze linger on the girl next to him for a few seconds. She was wearing a white dress, looking gentle and elegant. Those eyes, which looked 70% like mine, were staring right at me. Chris was surprised to see me. He stood up abruptly from the sofa. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His tone was a mix of panic and shock, but mostly impatience and irritation. I smiled as I approached and handed the gift bag to Chris. I looked at Chloe calmly. "A gift for your desk mate. I've been so busy with work I almost forgot to give it to you." Chris took it awkwardly, looking uncharacteristically lost. Chloe, however, stood up with a smile and took the bag directly from Chris. "Chris and I have always been close," she said, thanking me. "Buying a gift makes it feel a bit formal, doesn't it?" I smiled. He is him and I am me. It's my first time meeting his high school desk mate. It's better to be polite. Seeing the atmosphere turn awkward, the guy I'd met before walked over. He pointed at me and told the room, "This is Chris's girlfriend, she's one of us. Everyone relax." At those words, several guys started teasing Chris. Chris smiled and played along, then gave me a guilty glance. I pulled Chris to a corner. "I don't know these people, and my presence might ruin the mood. I'll head back to the office now." "Have fun. It's rare to have a reunion like this. Just remember to call me if you drink too much. I'll be available." Chris looked like he wanted to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. I waved to the room and left. I went back to the office to work for a while. When I was ready to head home, I called Chris, but someone hung up on me. Julian came over and asked if I needed a ride. I refused, saying I had to pick up my boyfriend. He looked at me for a long time before sighing heavily and telling me to be careful. I couldn't quite read the emotion in his eyes. I told him to get home safe and caught a taxi to find Chris. I was right, Chris hadn't gone home yet. When I reached the entrance of the club, I saw Will and another guy supporting Chris by his arms. Chloe was standing right next to them. Chloe's expression shifted when she saw me. I could feel her hostility. Will and the other guy looked relieved to see me and immediately handed Chris over. I supported him, wiped the sweat from his face, and said to Will, "I figured you guys hadn't finished yet." Chris wasn't answering, so I came straight here. Will rubbed the back of his neck, his face red from drinking. "Is your name Sophie?" Chloe's voice sounded skeptical. I looked at her as she took Chris's phone out of her bag and gave me a dynamic apology smile. "Sorry, I didn't know your name. When you called earlier, I thought it was just some female friend. Knowing he has a girlfriend, I just hung up." The guy next to her looked embarrassed. I smiled nonchalantly. "It's fine, now you know my name, thanks for tonight." I didn't wait for a response and helped Chris into the car. Since Chloe returned, Chris was rarely at home. He was always out having fun. Sometimes the dinner I left for him remained untouched. I didn't question him or get angry. I stopped cooking for him and just ordered takeout for myself. Julian was working on a major contract during this period. To save time, he started picking me up at the entrance of my neighborhood every morning so we could discuss work in the car. I thought it was unnecessary and said I could just leave earlier, but he insisted it was on his way, so I didn't argue. I wasn't exactly thrilled about squeezing onto the bus for work anyway. For a long time, Chris and I barely communicated, not even via text. Until 2 days before the Labor Day weekend, while I was revising a proposal with Julian, Chris called. His voice was slurred and hard to understand. It took me a while to realize he was drunk and wanted me to pick him up. Just as I was about to ask for the address, there was a scuffle on the other end. Then Chloe's voice came through. "Sorry, he's drunk. If you don't mind, he can just stay at my place tonight. I'll take good care of him." I curled my lips into a smile. "I don't mind, just take good care of him." "Sophie, aren't you afraid something might happen between us? After all, he still has feelings for me." My smile widened. "Miss Chloe, everyone in Chris's circle knows he has a girlfriend. If something really happens." I didn't finish the sentence, but she surely understood. "Don't worry," she said sharply. "I'll take very good care of him." The call ended abruptly. Julian, who was sitting close by, looked at me in shock. "Are you really that open-minded, letting your boyfriend sleep at another girl's house?" "Would you let someone you love stay at another person's house?" I countered. In that moment, I saw a smile bloom in Julian's eyes. Chris and I finally saw each other during the holiday. He stayed home, and so did I. I was in the kitchen cooking when he suddenly hugged me from behind. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have stayed at Chloe's that night. Don't misunderstand, we're just classmates who hadn't seen each other in years." I turned off the stove and hugged him back. "It's okay. It's my fault for being too busy with work, otherwise I would have picked you up." Chris wanted to say more, but I pushed him away gently and straightened his collar. "Besides, I trust you. You won't let me down." Chris pinched my cheek. "You're so good." I smiled and said nothing. I wanted to be good to him, to be understanding, to indulge him until he couldn't live without me. During the holiday, I bought Chris a pair of shoes he'd wanted for a long time. They cost me over $1,000. He was so happy, he stayed home for the rest of the break. One day, while I was organizing my things, Chris suddenly walked in. He saw the papers in my hand and asked, "What are those?" My hand froze for a second before I forced a smile. "These are receipts for the gifts I bought you. I want to keep them. When we get married, they'll be part of our memories." Chris didn't think twice and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You girls really know how to be romantic." I smiled and put the receipts away. Whether it was my imagination or not, Chris had been going out much less lately. He spent most of his time at home. I stopped ordering takeout and went back to cooking for him, which he finished completely. He even started ordering takeout for me when I worked late. I didn't eat any of it, though. I gave it to my colleagues who were also working late. He tried to pick me up from work several times, but I refused, saying my boss would drive me. He even got jealous, asking what the point of being a boyfriend was if he couldn't even do that. I spent a long time explaining that it was a hassle for him to come all that way, and that I might as well take the free ride. After the busy period, Julian gave me a few extra days off to rest. During those days, Chris still went out occasionally, but he always told me where he was going. He even asked if I wanted to join him when Chloe called, but I always used my writing as an excuse to decline. But the moment he asked that question, I knew the time was almost right. It was early November, and the weather had just turned cold. I was helping Julian pack documents for a business trip when I received a message from a college roommate. It was a photo she'd taken at a coffee shop. It showed Chloe and Chris. Their lips were pressed together, and Chloe had her arm around his shoulder. I looked at the photo expressionlessly and saved it. Julian walked over and asked, "Is your luggage ready for the trip?" I finished organizing the files and looked at him. "Mr. Julian, can you do me a favor?" "Name it," he replied. "Help me move out." Since Chris and I slept separately and he rarely entered my room, he had no idea I'd packed my bags days ago. With Julian's help, I moved everything to the apartment I'd rented a month prior. Julian looked at me in disbelief. "You've had an escape plan all along." I frowned as I pushed a box into the room, joking. "You make it sound like I'm the one being dumped." Julian followed me inside. "I didn't say that. It's your boyfriend who's blind for not treasuring you." I winked at him. "Right, I think so too. Men are all the same." "Even me," Julian blurted out. I looked at him in mock confusion, thinking for a long time before shaking my head slowly. "Mr. Julian, I can't really judge you. What if you cut my salary?" Julian laughed. "Am I that stingy?" "I don't know, but isn't it normal to be afraid of the boss cutting your pay?" Julian was going on this trip to negotiate with a partner. As his assistant, It was my duty to go along, especially since he gave me a bonus. I treated it like a vacation. I didn't message Chris until we were about to board the plane. I sent him the photo, told him we were over, and informed him I'd moved out. I blocked his number but kept him on WeChat, though I muted his notifications so he wouldn't disturb my work. The day after we arrived, Julian took the partner out for dinner and drinks. After a few rounds of toasts, my face was flushed. The partner wanted to keep drinking with me, but Julian stepped in and stopped him every time. The deal was eventually signed, but Julian was drunk. I had to get him back to the hotel. Once he was settled, I went back to my room and casually scrolled through the messages Chris had sent. My heart felt nothing as I turned off the phone. It wasn't until Julian and I returned to the office after the trip that I ran into Chris downstairs. He had stubble on his chin and bloodshot eyes. Seeing me, he ran over and grabbed my suitcase. Julian gave me a look and told me sternly to handle it and then come up to see him. Chris gripped my hand, his voice trembling with a rare sense of panic. "Soph, where did you go? I've been looking for you for days. I've been waiting here for you." "That photo, you really misunderstood. I didn't kiss her. She suddenly grabbed me and kissed me." "I only love you, can't you feel that?" I looked at him, pulled my hand away, and remained expressionless. To be honest, I really can't. Chris was suddenly speechless. Ignoring the people around us, I continued. "If I didn't look like Chloe, would you have ever pursued me? Would you have ever been with me?" Chris's pupils contracted, and he clenched his fists. You knew." I pulled my suitcase toward me, looking at him with mockery in my eyes. "Chris, I did love you once, but I'm not pathetic. I was a substitute for Chloe for over 2 years. Now that she's back, it's time for you to let me go." I was about to leave when Chris blocked my path again. "But Soph, these past few days I've been thinking about it over and over. I realized I love you, not Chloe. It was my mistake, but can't you give me another chance? Our 2 years together, all the sweet moments we had." I let out a cold laugh. "Chris, don't put on an act for me. You were planning to break up with me when Chloe was about to return, weren't you? For those 2 years, you were only good to me because I had a face like hers. Now I've set you free. You can go chase you're the one that got away properly. And don't you find it disgusting to say those things now?" Chris was completely stunned. "We're broken up. Who you like has nothing to do with me. Please move, don't disrupt my company's order." I walked around him, but then I noticed the shoes he was wearing. "Oh, and by the way, those laptops, shoes, and everything else. You should either throw them away or transfer the money to me. Because using the word gift for you feels like a curse." I pulled several receipts from my bag and threw them at him. Chris stood there dazed for a moment. "So that's why you kept the receipts. Sophie, are you getting revenge on me?" I shook my head. "I just wanted you to feel what it's like." As I turned to leave, Chris grabbed me again. There were tears in his eyes now, and his gaze was pleading. "Sophie, I really know I was wrong. I can't live without you. Let's not break up, okay? I'll cut off contact with Chloe. I'll get a job. I'll support you in the future. I'll pay you back all that money, just don't leave me. These days you were away, I don't even know how I got through them." My eyes showed no trace of emotion. "You and Chloe will have a better life together." I broke free of his grip and walked away without looking back at his dejected face. Since many people saw our argument, the news spread through the company by the next day. The details of our conversation even reached Julian's ears. That morning, he picked me up at my new apartment and brought me breakfast. While I was eating, he asked, "So all that kindness you showed your ex was just to hurt him?" I took a sip of soy milk. "He used me as a substitute for the one that got away and wasted 2.5 years of my youth. Why shouldn't I collect some interest?" Julian clicked his tongue and shook his head in admiration. "You're really not like other girls. You're quite ruthless toward men." If I had broken up with him then, I would have been miserable for a long time while they flaunted their love, I said. "I couldn't do that. I won't let myself be the victim." Chris treated me as a substitute and wanted to kick me aside when she returned. The thought of me being sad, while they lived happily ever after, was unacceptable. I had to capture his heart and then shatter it. That's the only way to do justice to my 2 years. Julian chuckled. I guess I should be careful then. I didn't quite catch his meaning, but didn't press further. The news of our breakup soon reached Will and the others. After learning the reason, Will only sent one message: Chris didn't know how to treasure you. I didn't reply, but I figured all of Chris's roommates thought the same. Chris didn't harass me anymore, but one day I received a call from an unknown number. It was Chloe. "You should come see Chris," she said. "He's been in a terrible state, drinking constantly and calling your name." I found it hilarious. Before, I was the one taking care of a drunk Chris while he called her name. Now, she was taking care of him while he called mine. I told her I wouldn't come. We were over, and she should take care of him herself. I heard her take a deep breath. "I'm curious," she said. "What kind of spell did you cast on him? He's always loved me, yet now he calls for you." I laughed. "Miss Chloe, didn't you do everything you could to make us break up? Now that we have, you can be together. Why are you bothering me?" There was a long silence before she spoke with a hint of hatred. "Sophie, I underestimated you." "I'm flattered," I replied, "but I still wish you two a happy ending." I hung up and didn't give it another thought. After the breakup, I felt a huge weight lifted. I didn't have to cook for anyone or take care of anyone, let alone pretend to be deeply in love. However, as the weather got colder, I kicked off my blanket in my sleep and caught a cold. I took a day off from work and planned to rest at home alone. I didn't expect Julian to show up at my door shortly after I sent the message. He made medicine for me, cooked for me, and stayed the whole day. I was a bit groggy and didn't think much of it until I woke up in the afternoon feeling much clearer. Seeing Julian sitting by my bed on his tablet, I whispered, "Mr. Julian, you taking care of me like this might make me misunderstand things." Seeing I was awake, Julian quickly handed me a glass of water. "It's okay to misunderstand, and as your senior, it's only right for me to look after you." I took a sip of water and looked down. If he hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten we went to the same university. We were silent for a long time. He sat by the bed while I leaned against the headboard, feeling my ears get hot and uncomfortable. Finally, I heard him speak. "Actually, you don't even need to misunderstand. I've liked you for a long time." It sounded like he had gathered a lot of courage to say those words. My brain felt like it exploded. I looked at him in shock. He looked down awkwardly, his hands rubbing his trousers, looking incredibly embarrassed. I let out a laugh. "Julian, you shouldn't make jokes like that." He looked up, his expression dead serious. "I'm not joking." I nodded, put the glass on the nightstand, and tried to move past the awkwardness. That little episode didn't affect our relationship. We were the same as before, except Julian became much bolder, frequently mentioning that he wanted me to be his girlfriend. I just treated it as a joke and brushed it off. I had just broken up. Even if I liked him, I couldn't jump into a new relationship immediately. It would cause gossip and hurt his reputation. Until New Year's Day, when Chris found me again. He looked much better. I don't know how he found my place, but when I came back from grocery shopping, he was at the gate. He apologized and said he'd reflected for months. He asked if we could start over. I hated seeing him like this, acting all deep and emotional. It was repulsive. "Chris, even a good horse doesn't turn back for old grass," I said bluntly. "Look into your heart. Do you really love me? You're just used to me being there." Before he could argue, a voice interrupted. "Junior Chris, you should try getting used to being alone. You shouldn't keep thinking about other people's girlfriends." Julian walked over and naturally draped an arm around my shoulder. Chris stared at us, too shocked to speak. I pursed my lips and didn't pull away. Noticing he was still wearing the shoes I'd bought him, I frowned. "Since you can't bear to throw those things away, just transfer the money. We have nothing left between us." Chris looked at us for a long time, his fists clenching and unclenching. Finally, he just said, "Okay," and turned to leave. His back looked lonely, like a stray dog that had lost its home. Julian and I turned and walked away. Julian's smile didn't fade. Once we were inside and sure Chris couldn't see us, he let go. "You didn't object just now," he said. I paused while opening the door and nodded. "Yes, I didn't." "Does that mean I can be your boyfriend now?" I didn't say anything, but took the groceries into the kitchen. Then I looked back at him with a smile. Why else do you think I asked you over for dinner today? Julian was so happy he kissed my cheek and hugged me from behind. Thank you, he whispered. It felt a bit bittersweet. I took his hands and looked into his eyes. Julian, I think we can give it a try. I have feelings for you too, so you don't need to thank me. He pinched my cheek, grinning. Okay, girlfriend. After Julian and I got together, Chris never bothered me again. One day, a sum of money was transferred to my bank account from him. I heard later that Chris and Chloe were together for a while but broke up quickly, and she went abroad again. Later, Chris got another girlfriend. Will said the new girl looked a bit like me and a bit like Chloe. I didn't pay it much mind. I just looked at the man busy in the kitchen, and a sense of fulfillment rose in my heart. Julian turned around and smiled. Why are you staring at me? I thought for a moment, when did you start liking me? He didn't answer immediately and kept busy. It wasn't until we sat down to eat that he spoke. A long time ago, longer than Chris actually. I froze with my chopsticks in the air, looking at him blankly. He put a piece of fish on my plate. It was at the school cafeteria, when you were arguing with the auntie over a piece of fish. It was in the library, seeing you study so seriously. It was on the track, watching you run. Each thing he mentioned added a layer of bittersweetness to my heart. Then I heard him say, Sophie, I started my business for you. I was stunned, ignoring the tears that had started to fall. He said his family wasn't well off, and he was afraid I wouldn't like him or that he couldn't give me a good life. So he wanted to build something first. By the time his business had some success, I was already with Chris. When he saw my resume and then found out I'd broken up, he decided to chase me. My eyes were red. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Julian panicked and quickly came over to comfort me. But we're together now, aren't we? We didn't miss each other. I sobbed, but... He wiped my tears away. No buts, Sophie, we won't miss each other, don't cry. I nodded and buried my face in his chest. I had taken many wrong turns, but looking back, I realized someone had been waiting for me all along.